Good evening and welcome back to the channel. Now, in 2024, we've been to some incredible theme parks across Europe and the UK. We've been to Phantasialand, we've been to Efteling, we've been to Toverland and many more. But here in the UK, the primary parks that we visited were Alton Towers down in Staffordshire and Blackpool Pleasure Beach on the coast. Now, surprisingly, out of the two UK parks that we visited, it was actually Blackpool Pleasure Beach which came out on top for us, and most of the visits that we had there during the year, we actually had a really enjoyable time. With that being said, and with Blackpool being our favourite park last year, we thought what we'd do is we'd have a look at all of the rides on offer at Blackpool Pleasure Beach and decide what we'd do in 2025. Would we remove them? Would we refurb them, or would we just ride them some more? So first up is Derby Racer. Operating since 1959, this is one of only three left in existence, and the only one of the three to actually be self-built by Pleasure Beach themselves. Another one of these is actually located in the roller coaster capital of the world, Cedar Point, and I do find that fascinating that somewhere like Cedar Point has the same iconic nostalgic ride as Blackpool Pleasure Beach. Now, despite this ride not actually working correctly for a number of years, it's supposed to race back and forth as well as up and down. It is actually a nice simple ride for theme parks, and for me, a theme park or an amusement park should always have at least one carousel style ride in the park. It just feels right and it adds to the aesthetic of the park in my opinion. And not to mention that this thing adds a huge amount of capacity to the park. If you were to put two people on each horse, you would be able to get roughly 112 riders per cycle on this ride. With the capacity that it holds, with the nostalgia it holds, and with the aesthetic of the whole thing, then for me, this definitely falls into the ride some more category. Now, on to flying machines. Now, this opened in 1904 and is the oldest ride not only at the park, but also it is in fact the oldest operating ride in Europe. And this one is a bit of an enigma because its fate is somewhat out of Pleasure Beach's hands. This is because in 2017, the flying machines were designated a Grade 2 listed building or ride by Historic England. And this means that the building and ride cannot actually be demolished by Blackpool without receiving some form of consent. And given that Pleasure Beach would need to unequivocally prove that there is no viable alternative other than demolition, it's unlikely we'll be seeing this going anywhere anytime soon. So with the nostalgia it holds, it's a beautiful old ride built by Sir Maxim, I think is his name. An old inventor. He's a fascinating guy to look up. The flying machines was actually built as a test for actual flying machines. And it turned out to work so well that he actually put it into an amusement park ride. And he hated having to put things in amusement parks, and he gave that up quite soon afterwards. But after the few of these that he actually made, we've got one of the oldest, most nostalgic rides in the UK and Europe. So well done, Sir Maxim. On to the Grand National now. The Grand National opened in 1935 and is the only Mobius Loop roller coaster in the UK and is one of only 5 remaining in the entire world. And it does hold some special significance over at Blackpool Pleasure Beach, with MBE Andy Hine actually getting married on this ride. And I believe one of the trains actually has a plaque installed with his name on it. Now, the main problem with the Grand National is that it's actually rough as a badger's arse. A chiropractor doesn't adjust your spine as much as a ride on this one does. Now, the only problem with doing anything significant with the Grand National is that, again, it's actually a Grade 2 listed ride, meaning that it's next to impossible to get rid of it and very hard to make any significant adjustments to it as well. So, with that being said, I think if you could change anything on it, you'd change the wheel assembly to somehow allow for a smoother ride. That'd really benefit the ride experience, and if you could do that, I'd put this one squarely in the refurb category. Now we move on to Valhalla. So This reminds me a lot of the Curse of Alton Manor at Alton Towers, in that it's a fantastic ride, it has some great effects, but the problem is it's not very consistent at all. It has effects that don't work all of the time. Every ride that you go on, it's something different, could be down. And for a ride that cost as much as it did, and is sort of the main dark ride over at Blackpool Pleasure Beach, it needs to have something a bit more reliable in terms of its operating system and its effects, to get it really, really on that list of best dark ride in the UK. Another problem with it is that it's a soaker. It's responsible for more wet seats than a Harry Styles concert, which in a UK climate, especially in Blackpool, where you constantly feel like you're in the midst of an F5 tornado, it's not the most pleasant experience to ride it and then come back out. I mean, you get that wet, Pleasure Beach have actually made a business of selling Crocs to people that have just been on Valhalla. But with that being said, it's an immersive ride. When the effects are working, they are fantastic effects, and overall it's a really, really fun thing to do, and is one of the best rides at Pleasure Beach. So for me, I'm going to put this in the refurb category, because if you could make sure that it's got consistent effects on it, and you can have some sort of adjustment on the ride to ensure that you don't need to vacuum out water of every single boat that you go on, then I think this could be an absolute world-class ride. Now on to Ice Blast. So this originally opened as PlayStation The Ride back in 1997, and the SNS Drop Tower has always been popular amongst park fans, but over the last few years it's seemingly lost a fair bit of its force and has become increasingly unreliable as well. So original speculation was that this would be replaced with an Intamin gyro swing that Pleasure Beach had purchased. However, it was announced earlier this month that that's not the case. The gyro swing will be going elsewhere, and Ice Blast will actually be making a long-awaited return. And not just returning, it's going to get a complete overhaul with a brand new space theme and the new name Launchpad. Not only this, but a brand new pressure cylinder will be installed, meaning that some of the power seen when it originally opened is going to return as well. So with this already receiving kind of that refurb, that refreshment, then this one has to be a ride some more. On to the big one. So operating since 1994, this was the standout coaster at the park, and for 30 years in the UK too. Holding the record for the world's tallest and steepest roller coaster for 3 years, and then holding the title of the UK's tallest roller coaster for a further 27 years, this roller coaster was iconic. And despite Hyperia taking its crown, there is still something pretty special about the views that you get over the Irish Sea before you drop down that first drop. Saying that, despite having constant retracts, the ride is a wee bit rough, and it's lost its major selling point now. So 30 years on, it doesn't really have the same star power that it used to. So for me, I'd like to see this replaced with a modern hypercoaster, something like Hyperion, and therefore the big one goes on the remove list. Icon. Operating since 2018, this is it's really the only modern day roller coaster at the park. The Mack launched coaster has its very own super fan base, and people still argue that this is the best roller coaster in the UK. And with Hyperia being its main competition, that's saying something. It's fun, it's smooth, it has a great layout. This one's not really debatable. It's got to stay on the ride some more list. Alice in Wonderland. Operating since 1962, this tracked dark ride is always a pleasure to take a ride on when we visit the park. And fun fact, Pleasure Beach are actually allowed to use the Alice in Wonderland IP because Walt Disney himself struck up a friendship with Leonard Thompson way back in the day. Now, despite my fondness for this ride and its ties to Disney, the old ride track system is as janky as hell, and it's a very, very dated dark ride on the inside. For me, this space could be used to bring a more world-class dark ride to the park, and therefore, hesitantly, it gets on the remove pile. The Ghost Train, not even a question, ride it some more. The Ghost Train is a track dark ride built in 1936, and despite it not being the oldest ride at the park, it probably does hold the spot of the most nostalgic and beloved of the older rides at the park. It's steeped in a lot of history, with stories such as Cloggy's Ghost, and being the fact that it was the first ever ride to be named Ghost Train, it's easy to see why it's such a loved attraction. So the combination of the rich history and my personal nostalgia for this ride puts it firmly on the ride some more list. On to Wallace and Gromit. So, Wallace and Gromit's Thrill-O-Matic replaced the gold mine back in 2013 and has been pretty much universally loved ever since. It's quite often stated as one of the UK's best dark rides, and it is a great dark ride, which the UK is severely lacking. Now, despite some of the effects being a bit mistimed in my opinion, when I've been on it you'll find that you'll almost get past the scene before the lights come on and the animatronics go off. At least the last time I was on, that's what it was like. But overall, it's a really great dark ride and definitely should be on the ride some more list. So Nick Streak, operating since 1933, this uses the lift hill from the Velvet Coaster, which was removed in 1932, making this another classic wooden roller coaster at Blackpool Pleasure Beach. It's smooth, it's fun. Now, I'm not massively keen on the whole Nickleodeon Land area, but the ride itself is a really good ride. The theming around it is just me nitpicking. There's nothing drastically wrong with it, and it does hold the sort of the record of being the highest wooden roller coaster in the park. Not much of a record in the park, but it is what it is. But yeah, it's fun, and there's nothing drastically wrong with it. So to me, this has to be on the ride some more list. And then Revolution, operating since 1979. This Aerodynamics launch loop coaster is a complete classic, and if you live in the north of England, it's likely going to have been one of the first ever inverted coasters that you've ever been on. Yes, it's short, but with it being so short, it makes it really compact too, and it barely takes up any space in the park. You get rid of that, there's nothing much you can put in its place, which is going to have the same aesthetical feel as Rev does. That old-fashioned arrow style loop is just wonderful to look at. It looks great, it sounds great when you're going past it. For me, this is a ride some more. And then Avalanche, operating since 1988. Avalanche is another first for the park. So it was the first and currently the only bobsled ride in the UK, and it was opened by Eddie the Eagle himself. So this Mack bobsled is a really fun family ride. However, it is getting quite old now, and it's at the point where it needs some major care to really get it looking and working perfectly. But not only that, I find that it's one of the slowest queues in the park, so it doesn't really help capacity at all. If you don't get there first thing and get into that queue, it takes you forever to get through it. And for me, it's not really helping in any way. It doesn't have the looks, it doesn't have the ride experience, it takes up a hell of a lot of space, and it's not really helping with capacity. So for me, something a lot better and a lot more compact yet fun could go in this area. Think of a modern spinning coaster like Dwervelwind at Toverland. That would fit quite nicely there. So with that being said, for me, Avalanche gets removed. And then on to Steeplechase, which has been operating since 1977 and is a 3-tracked racing roller coaster, a custom-built coaster that was officially opened by the horse Red Rum. So much like a lot of Blackpool, this is the only operating steeplechase left in the world. Now, as much as it's a great ride, and with it being the last one in the world, it is a massive piece of nostalgia for the park. It takes up so much space, it's unbelievable. And if you take nostalgia out of the equation, it's not the most exciting ride ever either. In which case, it pains me to say it, but I think this should be removed, because you can fit almost any ride you can think of in the space that Steeplechase takes up, and it's a shame to waste that much space celebrating nostalgia alone. So for me, Steeplechase, removed. Now, river caves, these have operated since around 1905, making them the second oldest ride in the park. Now, this dark boat ride is massively iconic, and it has seen some major changes and updates in the past as well, because they've wanted to keep it. Intamin came in and refurbished and partly altered the layout in 1974, adding the small drop at the end that we know now. Now, the ride itself, whilst it holds a dear place in the memories of a lot of people, I feel that once again, it's being held together by nostalgia. And for me, replacing it with a modern day dark boat ride like Pirates of the Caribbean or Fata Morgana is going to help push Blackpool into the future. So unfortunately, again, with hesitancy, I say this one goes on the remove list. Infusion, shite, remove it. Big Dipper, operating since 1923, this is one of the most beloved wooden roller coasters at the park, and the poor thing has seen some tough times. It's been ravaged by fire twice in its lifetime, but is somehow still standing tall. Again, it's a tough one to do anything with because it's another grade 2 listed ride. However, for me, some small profile changes or potential layout changes could shove this coaster towards the future. I know it's dreaming, but I'd maybe get RMC or GCI in to come and retrack it. But either way, whether it gets retracked or whether it's left alone, it's got to stay, and therefore it's on the Ride Some More list. And that is it for the remove, refurb or ride some more list. If you've liked the video, then by all means smash the like button. If you agree or disagree with anything we've said, then by all means bob it in the comments down below. What kind of rides would you remove, replace or refurb at the park? And by all means, please smash the subscribe button. We're on our way to 2,000. I never thought I'd be saying that we're on our way to 1,000, let alone be aiming for 2. Honestly, it's the best Christmas present you could ever give me, and it costs you absolutely nothing. So if you could, please smash the subscribe button. And with that being said, we'll catch you on the next one. Goodbye.